Okay, then. Well, let's just begin with some introductions. We already sort of heard everyone, but if people could simply go around, say their name, and maybe a quick identification so we can pair up a name with a voice. And let's just start off with Michael Williamson.
Hi, this is Michael Williamson, live from Reading, Pennsylvania, and I'm ready to meet my fellow photographers and participants.
And Ben Roberts.
Hi there, this is Ben Roberts. I'm a photographer from London, in the United Kingdom. Looking forward to being involved.
David Wells.
Hi, this is David Wells from San Luis Obispo, California, though I'm based in Providence, Rhode Island. I'm in California also working on some foreclosure photography.
Andrew Lichtenstein.
Hi, this is Andrew Lichtenstein. I'm a photographer in New York City, and I'm in the Catskills right now parenting.
Not Ida. Lorette?
Hi, I'm Lorette Steinberg, and I'm a photographer, and I also teach photography at Rochester Institute of Technology. I'm in Rochester, where it's not snowing yet.
And I'm Tony Slaw, although I'm assuming you're not talking yet.
Yeah, we may have lost Tony. Ida's still working the back channel on that to see if we can get Tony on. I think I might just do a little introduction here, and then we can get rolling.
Go for it.
Welcome, everyone. This is Michael Shaw. I'm the publisher of BagNews. This is our 11th salon dating back to 2008. We've covered subjects from the death of bin Laden to the coverage of the Haiti earthquake to the Gulf oil spill. Before I introduce the subject, I just want to say a few words about BagNews, the salon, and also today's subject and the edit. If you're not familiar with us, we're the only site 100% dedicated to visual imagery. We analyze news photos and their role in the media and the political sphere on a daily basis at BagNews Notes. We also publish original photojournalism with a specific eye toward the informational as well as the symbolic value of that imagery. And we were recognized for that mission by Life.com earlier this year. They named us as one of to their list of top 20 photo blogs. So that was quite an honor. If you're not already doing so, I hope you'll follow us on the web. We're on Twitter, we're on Facebook, we're on Tumblr now. But particularly, we're interested in you becoming part of our daily discussion at BagNews Notes. It's a seminar, it's not a lecture. And we're listed on all those platforms, by the way, under BagNews Notes. So a few words about today's mission. As I said, our agenda at BagNews is an interesting one and a unique one, I believe, in terms of analyzing pictures. Whereas, there's many distinguished people and publications out there that are brilliant at associating to photos. For us, our primary agenda is to look at photos and read photos one at a time. As much as we care what people have to say to a photo, we care a lot more about what each shot, each discrete photo and its elements and its composition, its emotionality, its tensions, and its ambiguity is trying to say to us. In terms of this specific topic today, obviously the visual depiction of the Great Recession, officially dated to December 2007 and precipitated by the mortgage meltdown and the ensuing banking crisis, represents a huge landscape of imagery spanning multiple phases and dozens of themes. In this instance, what we try to do is, rather than build a representative edit, which is always a challenge for us, especially trying to scale down to 9 pictures to talk about over 9 minutes as we do. Instead, what we decided to do is focus on a group of distinguished photojournalists who have been covering the recession in depth. From there, what we tried to do was select a group of their photos with 1 or 2 others, avoiding anything that was too iconic or traditional or involving too traditional a narrative, that offered the greatest breadth when it comes to this myriad of themes from the recession. So I'm honored to have these photographers here today, along with an equally distinguished group of academics specializing in the visual rhetoric of poverty and social welfare. And I'm not sure if we need any more orientation of the system from Ida. If so, she can jump in. But otherwise, let's go right to our fine moderator, Nate Stormer from the University of Maine, and let's get the process started.
All right, thank you. what I will do is, just in terms of a process, I think we'll start off with one of the images for each photographer. And what I would like to do to start off with is just for each photographer to say a brief comment about that image within the series that they were shooting when they took it, and then we'll open it up. And what I think would be nice is to not have each person sort of read their own image to start off, but let other people begin that process. Instead of framing how to read it, we'll sort of open it from the audience, so to speak, and move through each photographer that we have, give each person a chance that way. And then with the remaining images, I think we might move around a little bit more depending on where the conversation is. I did want to say just one quick note about my own interest in this is I grew up sort of lower working class, and my father fell ill, and this is back in the 70s, and we fell right into public assistance and a lot of difficulties for many years, and many of my family still live in poverty. And I'm really sort of overwhelmed with how difficult it is to see the recession. As Michael said, it covers a lot of time, a lot of space, a lot of different conditions, but something that affects so many people still being essentially invisible for me is a very powerful problem. And so that's just my own sort of interest in it. Not that that should color anyone's particular response, but I think a lot of these images speak to, in my view, the invisibility of something that is so ever-present. So to start off with, why don't we go to the first slide? I'll put it up, and then we'll get a short introduction from you.
Okay, so I've been making work since 2007 on the effects of the economic crisis in Spain on the physical and social landscapes. This photograph was made in September 2007 on the outskirts of Granada. Spain has had a huge economic boom throughout the kind of late 1990s and into the early kind of 2000s, which was followed by a kind of catastrophic collapse in the economy. This has been kind of realized in a huge excess of housing, almost 3 to 4 million empty homes, and also really devastating unemployment rates. So in places like Granada, there's unemployment, especially from the age of like 18 to 25, of up to 50%. So this photograph is a housing estate on the outskirts of Granada, which had been completed about 6 months before I took the photograph, and yeah, this is the image that's kind of become quite representative of the body of work that I've compiled.
Thank you very much. What do people think of this image?
I think that most of us, we're accustomed to seeing places that used to already be used or lived in, or where businesses were. And one of the things we're starting to see now, and certainly we've even had that here in Rochester, where there are new enterprises being built. I mean, that are never going to be filled because everything tanked. So it's a new kind of image. It's a new kind of subject that we're still learning what it means, what it actually represents.
If I can feed off of that, I agree with Laurette. My next thought would be that it's also got some interesting formal qualities, which on the one hand are almost aesthetically enticing, and at the same time the subject matter and also the issues it raised kind of almost go counter to the formal nature of the image.
I find the lack of people, the sort of no cars, no children, the sort of bleak symmetry, and the fact that the roadway has still got building dust and the sort of panada of workmen that just seem to have left the whole place in the state it's in. It's the same in Ireland and in other places. Like there are states in Ireland where they've sold one house and there's 30 or 40, maybe 50 or 100 other houses empty.
I think we're used to looking at what used to be now being abandoned, and we have a nostalgia, a sadness, a sense of loss. And what we're looking at here is actually a loss of the thing that was anticipated, expected, and that ordinarily would have meant future.
Yeah, there is a sense that the future's just been cut off. The sort of momentum of development and progress has hit a brick wall.
I think that's sort of interesting about this notion where you were saying some way, Lorette, that this could be seen as opportunity. Like, look, shouldn't you be buying one of these? It's a new neighborhood, or it's sort of in that same moment of from a different point in time could be seen like this is a space to live in that needs to be lived in, as opposed to one that cannot be lived in, or is abandoned, or is too much, or excessive.
I almost wonder, since this is such a new thing for us to encounter, we're all still learning what this means when we see a place like this. I'd love to see a whole series of the places that will never be that we thought were going to be the future.
That's a great idea.
Can I just say something? I think some of the complexities about the Spanish housing system are they're really, someone mentioned before about, this is like, why do people move in here? I mean, the house prices in Spain just exploded from 1985 onwards. So you're kind of stuck in this catch-22 where you have all these new homes, but no one can afford to move into them. You've got people graduating with architecture degrees from the University of Granada who are working for €5 or €6 an hour as interns at architecture firms, and they're fighting for those positions, and no one's getting them. I don't see. This is repeated in Greece. It's repeated in Portugal. I've not been to Italy, but maybe there's kind of some similar stuff going on there. Where do you go from here? Where do you go?
I also wonder too, relative to that, is that we're supposed to want this. It's sort of built on the aspiration that we're supposed to want this, which of course it is completely dislocated or separate from people's reality and what they can do and what they can live. It's quite jarring.
I think Jim Cathcart brought up a really good point where he talks about a place that would not be much fun to inhabit. Now, the expansion in Spain was so rapid, and one thing that really struck me was that they left behind a lot of the values of planning and development that have been built up over centuries in Spain. The idea of communal space, the kind of communities that were built by living really close to each other. I almost feel like there's been an export of this value of, I don't know whether it's American or whether it's kind of British, but an export of this idea that you must have your own space and no one else can be in it, which didn't really exist in Spain before this expansion in the housing industry.
Interesting. Actually, I think David's photo next to Ben's is a nice association, because here we have a different sense of emptiness. So I'll put the caption up, but if David, you'd like to talk a little bit about this series that this image is in.
The project is actually called Foreclosed Dreams, and I'm playing off the idea that a home is the American dream, and it goes well with what people are mentioning today. This is a house in South Central Los Angeles. Should I keep going, or are we working with somebody else? I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
And I am going into foreclosed houses in different parts of the U.S. after the foreclosure happens and before they're cleaned up to photograph what I call the ghosts, which are the things that people leave behind, either by choice or if they're forced out, so you can get a sense of what happened there before. Yet it's not so much about the people as it is some somewhat more formal photos like the previous photo we were looking at, because that's the strategy that I decided to take with this project.
That's really interesting, because you're looking at the space after it's been unoccupied or ceased to be occupied versus the sort of never to be occupied that we were just looking at.
I agree. I mean, that's one of the interesting things to come on after the last photo is that these are the places that are occupied. And I'm approaching it somewhat similar in terms of the formal issues of the photography.
It's interesting how in this image, like the one we just looked at, Ben's, is about absence, and how, especially in Ben's shot, it felt like all the oxygen had been sucked out of that housing development. And this is an interesting image, particularly in contrast to the one that we used to advertise the salon by John Moore, which was also a mortgage repossession image, but it showed the woman out on the sidewalk with all of her possessions on her lawn. Here, you almost fill in with your mind, all of the objects that have been removed from this, very domestic, very personal space. And I find this pretty haunting, actually.
Thank you. That exact idea that you alluded to, the idea of filling it in from your own experience and your own idea about home, was my goal.
I think also one similarity to these last two photos is in terms of the formal qualities, is the really strong color contrast. Much of the image in the previous one is black and orange in the sky and the street, and here we have the wood and the green wall. And I'm wondering if that kind of visual starkness, along with the emptiness, really reinforces a kind of sense of deprivation.
Color palette was, this is Ben talking, by the way. Color palette was very important to me when I was making the work. Trying to keep consistent throughout, looking for these kind of really depressing tones, really.
It's a little harder for me to connect with this one emotionally because it is so abstracted. It's so removed from human beings, possibly because of the formal qualities. And I guess, David, also I'm thinking this is unusual for you. I don't know, what your other photographs about the foreclosures look like right now. Excuse me, but in this photograph, even the pacifier doesn't really resemble a pacifier. I don't feel it's connected to the baby it used to be connected to. And so it's maybe a little harder to see it as having had an impact on real people. It is very formal and certainly another way of expressing the issue.
It certainly is a change from other projects I've done in the past, which have been more about the people going through the process of whatever story I was telling, like the one I did on the pesticide poisoning of farm workers, which focused more on the individual. But, as a photographer, we're always evolving, and my brain and my aesthetic at the moment, I'm doing this work, wanted to sort of drawn to a more formal approach. The next thing I do maybe be going in a different direction. But for me, this has been the way to make it open for the viewer, but also to try to make it human. But I hear your point as well.
Yeah, I'd be interested in hearing you talk about that decision. I think that in itself is also interesting. I don't think there's one way of speaking visually, but I think for the participants too, but other people who are perhaps listening or observing, be interesting to hear how you were so moved to start making photographs like this.
Well, it's interesting to be on this exact panel because there are other people on this panel who obviously are photograph the same subject, many of whom have taken on the people, and to some degree, because photojournalism is in reality a competitive market, that was one of my questions. Could I do work as powerful as some of the other people in this group? And I wasn't 100% sure that I could do that, and so I wanted to come up with a visual and aesthetic and journalistic strategy, and so I tried to sort of turn it around and played with it in my head and then played with it in the field for a while, and this is a strategy that I came up with.
I think it's very interesting, and I think it makes a lot of sense. I mean, both the first two images we've looked at, it really does. I mean, recession and the loss, I think, is emptiness. Different kinds of emptiness is a fairly strong way to go with that. And then focusing on the buildings, the sort of without people, the neighborhoods without people, I think really plays into that. It's a very set of strong associations.
I'm trying quite hard to incorporate portraits into my work as well. I've got a couple more trips out to Spain planned in the next 6 months. I think for me, it's definitely important to include people in the images, especially young Spanish people, simply because of the kind of political movements that have started to arise over the last 6 months.
This is Williamson. I'm here.
Would you mind situating this photo a little bit?
Yeah, this is actually a follow-up photo for the original Recession Road project, started back in 2009, that I'm still on, and looks like right now we're committed, obviously, through the end of 2012 minimum. So basically, I was driving around the country by car, stumbling on stories, finding people, and this was just actually a couple that was hitchhiking. We'd met them about 300 miles on the other end of the state, Justin and Holly, and they had their little sad little suitcase. It was right out of the 30s. They were hitchhiking down the road, and we gave them a ride. What was funny about it is when we pulled up to talk to them, they were sort of afraid that we were creeps, and we saw that he had a knife, and we're afraid that he was scary, and we had to have this little talk about, look, I'm not dangerous, we just want to give you a ride. So it was me and a reporter, Teresa Vargas, and threw them in the back and heard their story. Just a young couple looking for work. She had a $7 an hour job at a fast food place that was lost. He had a $10 an hour construction job that was lost, and they were literally wandering aimlessly. They're engaged, and they had a $186 wedding ring on layaway at the Walmart. And so what this photo was 3 months later, we followed up with them, and they had since gotten married, were living at his mother's house, living on about $250 a month, and had yet to have enough money to buy the ring. So while they were married, she did not have a ring, but they were sharing some pizza that the brother brought over.
One of the things that I think is
Hi,
marvelous.
this is Andrew.
Oh,
Hi, Andrew.
I just wanted to say that as a photographer, hi, this is just the type of picture that I'm always looking to make. And by that I mean something very personal and individual that doesn't necessarily have the overt signs of the whole story, but it's just about two people, and you can still get the mood out of it.
and one of the things that I think is remarkable, Michael, is following up. That's one thing that so often we don't do as photographers. And I think following this couple later is really wonderful. You know, I'm imagining now what it would be like for them a year from now, and what the future they expect or hope for will be.
Well, this is Williamson again. You know, there's an interesting point that you make there, because some Walker Evans photos, 50 years later, and many of the people would say something like, he froze me in time. And I'm not frozen in time. In fact, I got a new Sunday dress a week after he photographed me wearing a flour sack. And while most people stayed, in a tough position, many resented that they were in history books and the walls of museums, and they had changed dramatically, even weeks after his Alabama. And I was very aware of this. And this project I'm on right now, sort of Recession Road redo, much of my work reportage is following these people from just 2 years ago, and the changes have been dramatic in both directions, either much worse or people who found a way to reinvent themselves and are making it. And yet, if you just study the photos from 2 years ago, you'd say, well, there's somebody doomed to eternity. And so you bring up a really good point. Follow-up gives you a broader context that sometimes the initial image can leave you with an impression that's only true.
Yeah, I really agree with what Ben is saying and Andrew, and I really felt like leading off the edit actually with this image, because not only because of how positive it is, but just also I think it really talks about resilience and hardiness, and it is very easy to stereotype people and show people as despondent from the recession, but this went a different direction, and to the extent that you see see the pile of letters there, and we can imagine that, there's all kinds of bad news and distress coming out of those, those envelopes. But, not just the hardiness and the spirit and the resilience, okay, if we have to live on pizza, but also, I think also the fact you see a little bit of her underwear there, there's a real kind of a sensuality and sexuality to this picture, both, which I think also drives home that kind of spirit and resilience.
Nathan may be able to address this too, but I too spent.
Well, that's a soup.
Go ahead, Laura.
Well, my take on the photograph is not necessarily that it's an optimistic, uplifting one, but I realize that people who grew up middle class often take this as an entirely reassuring image. Anybody growing up poor, which, I didn't know that about you, Nathan, but certainly I have as well. One of the things that I fought all of my life is that people don't understand that while some people are living in really dire circumstances, they're still human beings trying to make their life, and they still know how to love, they still know how to laugh. We tend to trivialize things and say it's either bad or good, or it's hopeless, or, oh, it's hopeful and now I don't have to worry anymore. And so I think, one of the things that this photograph says is that it's more complicated than that. And it's also interesting to hear how different people read the photograph depending upon the background that they bring to it.
Someone else was going to jump in there. I didn't hear who that was.
If I can jump in?
Wait.
Actually, this is Williamson again. I was going to do a little follow-up. I really... this is Williamson. Should I stop?
Yeah, go ahead, Michael. And then I think, was it Andrew is the person who's going to come in?
David.
Sorry.
Yeah, what my follow-up was, these comments are really dead on because one of the things the reporter asked was, you think this is a bad time to get married, death, depression, no jobs? And they said, no, it actually accelerated our wedding plans because that's all we have right now is each other. And we feel we're stronger with each other. They didn't want to live together unmarried. So there was even kind of an ethos involved. And it was very simple. Love will endure. I mean, they had great-grandparents who survived the Depression. They know that love goes on. We're going to endure. They figure they're going to wait it out. And so it is. It doesn't speak directly to jobs, no jobs, whatever. It addresses people do alter their lives because they know they're in a situation that's not going to change soon. But the comfort, the thing they could control, was they loved each other, wanted to be married, and were going to make the best of this tough situation. But as a couple, so the recession actually, accelerated their relationship in a way, and that was kind of the point of the story. The whole essay shows them, looking at rings and, meeting with mom, and in general, they're not going to go with us so long. They're going to go with it as a couple.
David.
I don't want to come off as the guy who's obsessed with the formal nature of the photograph, but one of the great things about this is the skin and the color and all of the elements that make it incredibly human about these particular real live people. And I think that's an important part that contributes to the image as well.
I agree, and I was actually thinking that, in the current glut of home remake shows, I mean, just the kitchen they're standing in, it's got, Formica cabinet, inexpensive woodwork, what might seem like a pile of bills you would imagine sitting next to them. There's so many things that signify a certain position in society, and that is, as Lorette was sort of saying, associated with presumably unhappiness, and yet they're happy despite that. So it's both conflicted, but also, I think, it reads very, very easily.
Hi, everyone. This is Kara.
Hi, Kara. Welcome.
Sorry for joining the conversation late. I just wanted to follow up on that point about the kitchen that David just made. If you follow her right arm, which is extended down on the counter, the top drawer has a handle that's askew. A screw has fallen off. All the other handles on the section below are horizontal, and that one's vertical. And to me, that's kind of just this telling detail that gets at some of what we've all been talking about, this idea that they're happy, they're focused on each other, they're together, they're living their life as best they can right now. And there's this whole, other world that everybody is just trying to hold together somehow.
As things fall apart around us.
It also strikes me.
It's also the context of.
Somebody go.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say this might have come up earlier in the conversation, but the fact that these folks are young, we tend to talk a lot about children or families, which we assume are older parents, but this is a single couple, and as Michael referenced, that image in the 1930s of two people heading out because they had nowhere else to go is really a poignant one.
Well, you guys are very observant on the context of the picture because, journalists and academics and other pundits, they use all these generic terms like, they're working class people, they're regular folks, they're people in the middle. No, these poor people, let's just cut to the chase. They're poor people, but they still have this kind of dignity. I remember when we specifically said, is there going to be room at your mom's place? It's like, oh, yeah, no, she's got a double wide. We got plenty of room for us. It's not a problem. So this is actually in a mobile home. And they're just like, she's got room, she's hardly going to charge us anything. But again, right down to the, the missing handle and the way they're dressed, that's just your classic all-American, East Tennessee, young people, living the normal life, but the bottom line is, they think they're kind of regular and middle class. It's the world that would designate them officially poor. They know that's sort of true, but their standards are so low as to what they need to survive, they wouldn't. I think Justin said it best. He had the great line. He said, we're broke, but we're not poor. Poor is like you're just screwed and it's hopeless. We're broke is just like a bad stretch. You got to wait out. And so that's their mindset, that even within the vernacular, there's kind of some hope there.
Shaw here, question for Williamson. Was the guy actually laughing?
What it was is I had been photographing them with the mom hanging out watching TV. It was a room where there was leftover pizza. And so the joke was whether they're going to share it or not. Actually, at one point, she went for the kiss, but it was almost like I'm going to steal a bite out of your mouth kind of thing. Joke, and then in fact, it's not even sharp because it was kind of a grab photo.
That last point you make, I think, is kind of interesting. I want to segue to a different image, but I want to pivot off that one point. That their view of themselves and image versus how they would be seen versus how they see themselves, like they see themselves maybe differently than people are going to look at this image. I want to move to, I think it's the sixth image, where this person is clearly aware of being in the photo, and it's just staged very differently. We don't have this photographer with us, so I would just, people can enter into it in terms of just really getting images of people. I'll put the caption in a minute, but essentially this man was arrested, got himself arrested so that he could get medical care.
The image itself really startled me by being here because one of the things we don't know is whether or not the recession actually pushed him towards robbing a bank, whether or not, there are all the facts that are outside of the photograph. I see this tormented man. And, without more of a context, I don't immediately associate it with anything having to do with the recession.
I basically agree with Lorette. It's a compelling photograph, and powerful face, but I do wonder about the context, though. On the other hand, if you're watching it in the context of everything we've seen within this dialogue, I think it kind of becomes very interesting because it's also human in a way that this earlier Michael Williamson's photograph was, in terms of being about a human experience.
A couple of people.
I think it shows the ultimate desperation.
Yeah, and a couple of people have been typing in that they said they're not sure how to feel about the photograph, but they wonder if he's crazy. Somebody suggested he looks a little bit like Charlie Manson, so that's sort of the visual language we bring to this photograph. But to David's point, in the context of the other photographs, we're reminded about how the other photographs help us to understand this one in a particular way.
Well, it needs context and the caption, but once you read it, you can't help but be struck by that is an act of desperation, to get arrested on purpose, to get medical care. I mean, boom, definitely a photo that, holds its own, just as like, wow, this is crazy what's going on here. But man, when I hear that caption, that's a mind blower, because that's the depth to which people have to go. And I think its power is in that information that you do know from the caption.
I didn't see that. Where is that information? I see just the caption where he's being held awaiting trial for an alleged bank.
Yep. The explanation I heard was he got himself arrested on purpose so that he could get medical care, which he would get in jail.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, the caption doesn't include that information, but yeah, he did that on purpose because that was how he could get medical care.
Yeah, he walked into. Sorry, can I talk? It's Ben Roberts. He walked into the bank and he said, "I want to do a bank robbery," and he said, "I'm holding you up for $1." So he got arrested on purpose so that he could get health care.
That certainly changes a lot.
And the reason I think, looking at this image versus the one we just saw, where you have that hopefulness, is as Michael was saying, people would say, "No, we're just broke, we're not poor," but how a small thing could put one of those people in his very shoes. It's not as if the difference between this and that sort of context is simply a matter of how desperate people feel and how different are they in that desperation. So it's, the sort of crazy look in his eyes makes it easy to put him outside the conversation, but in fact, he's really not.
Shaw here. If I hadn't have known that this photograph was a pretty standard news shot from a regional paper, I probably wouldn't have included it. And also if I didn't know specifically what the context was. But even still, looking at this guy's face and the expression, I can't help feeling a little bit unnerved, like maybe I'm getting played here. But and I don't know, maybe actually I am and we are, but if so, it could be that after the guy's got himself into jail so he can get medical care, maybe he's also playing with us a little bit in terms of how we can read his expression, because on one hand, yes, it seems like craziness, and is he been victimized by the recession, but also is he kind of victimizing us or playing with our heads to kind of get through that, whatever that glaze we all kind of walk around in, so that we understand what the crisis is about, and that he's got a point to make also.
Yeah, I would say that concur with Michael. One of the things that for me about this photo that's so striking is I feel like it's a photo about the viewer as much as anything else, and our responses and the extent to which we say, well, why does this guy look like this? What's he doing here? What's the story? What's the context? And in that way, images like this can be kind of ingenious in that it's turning it right back on us.
Yeah, it does really raise the question, who's really sick here, him or us? Us being society.
You can also compare and contrast with the earlier photo. You know, you've got a support system, however, maybe thin, you know, between this young couple and then their mother, and you know, and you don't know what this guy has, right? And perhaps he doesn't have much, and that's why he's in the situation he's in. So that the fact that he's alone, I think, is a big part of it too.
Also, sticking with some of the conversation about formal qualities, just the lines in the brick and the kind of narrow, I mean, he's sort of being thrown at us visually, and so that makes his expression all the more powerful. If he's not in that narrow hallway with all those lines and the whiteness of it, I mean, it's easily translatable to a mental institution, not a jail. I mean, there's a lot about that image that's just extremely effective for being so simple.
It is simple, but it's got some nice qualities. And if you actually think about this one in comparison to Migrant Mother, the Dorothea Lange one that's become iconic of the Recession, in some ways they can kind of talk to each other about how this is the contemporary update. Obviously, it's different body language and gender and all that. But this one's more directly at the viewer, and that one where she's looking off into space may tell you something about that recession and that depression and this recession.
Well, one thing to mention about this is Michael Shaw. One thing that's interesting to mention about this image is if you just looked at it in a very cursory way, you would relate it to 2009 and the mortgage meltdown, where a lot of middle management or kind of a lot of the junior traders on Wall Street were sent packing, and it definitely reads. It actually pulls for that strongly, whether it was dated to that time or not. The thing is, though, that it's actually taken. I'm not sure the exact date. Ida could tell us, but I think it was something like a year and a half later. So it doesn't sync with that set of events.
I'm just really drawn to the top right of this image. The guy staring at the invisible George Washington statue, the woman on the other side. Like, to me, that whole right upper quadrant of the image is the real anchor of this whole thing.
One of the things. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, David, and I'll go after you. David, you were going to say something?
That wasn't me. Somebody else was.
Say a little bit more about why you see that as an anchor, Carol.
I think the guy with the box, you know, is looking over at the statement about George Washington. This is where he took the oath as first president of the United States of America. So he's reading the language, and above that, you have, I don't know who this is, right? Tourist, worker, somebody, you know, looking up, right? Attempting to apprehend what I presume is some sort of iconic statue. It looks like it's a statue of Washington from what the base says. So to me, it's just the eye, the movement of the guy on the left, the fact that he's blurry, the fact that he is walking, you know, with his box. Eventually he will pass and essentially cover, you know, that statement about the first iconic American, and that to me is really, really compelling.
I can pick up on that as well. I mean, what struck me is the relationship first between, and the way my eye traveled through this frame, is the man carrying the box and passing the site where our first president took his oath. And it makes me wonder if the man carrying the box has the contents of his office that perhaps he's been downsized, because it doesn't look to be a box filled with Staples paper because it doesn't look heavy enough. And so then I start looking around at the other figures, what each of them might represent, and the text there about where our first president stood to take his oath comes back to, could he have predicted this as the state of affairs now? You know, and the man playing the flute, who looks pretty much like he's decided not to participate in the other things that people are participating in that are now failing.
David here. I I just to build on all those interpretations, which I also have a similar initial reaction to it. My sort of closing reaction as I spend time with the photograph is how each person's in their own sort of mental time zone and very disconnected. And I think I always take that as an allusion to the sort of social connection that probably is at the core of how we ended up in this mess.
Quick little process comment. Bennett's suggestion, I agree. If people would use the little hand function to mark, put a hand up, that way we can maybe create a little smoother flow in our conversation. It's right underneath the names in the window. You can see the little hand. If you click that, it'll put an icon for putting your hand up, raising your hand. Sorry to...
Oh, so now I've raised, this is Williamson, I just raised my hand, is that how it works?
Yes.
Yeah, actually, you can do a lot of kind of navel staring, go on and on about symbolism and what the three people represent, and I think it's kind of simple. One thing we do not see, and at least I don't see on the road, which I've been on off and on for a couple years now, you don't see the extremes cross each other's paths. You know, you can go do a story about the people who buy Maseratis in Beverly Hills. You can go do the story, but you don't normally see these people crossing paths. So the power of this picture for me is, you know, it is probably some kind of worker, at least I put that together in my head, that maybe lost his job or moving or downsized. And he's crossing paths with what may be a homeless guy that's his future, you know, not like distant future, maybe close-up future. And then the top three people, kind of everything in between. So you have the extreme of some guy might have had it all, guy has nothing. And then the other three up top are just the transitional figures of not those two extremes. So the picture struck me immediately just before I even know the caption. It's just two socioeconomic layers that would normally not be in the same frame, and he gets 500 bonus points just for that from me.
I'm not sure if it's completely obvious, this is Michael, that the people situate this photo geographically, that Federal Hall basically is catty-corner to the New York Stock Exchange, so the guy who's looking up at the statue, if he looked down and just a little bit slightly to his right, he'd be looking at the entrance to the stock exchange.
Well, even the iconographic nature of the architecture, you know, things written in stone and big columns and representation of power and strength and longevity, and yet, as we know, it's extremely fragile, and there is some fragility, obviously, in both the guy carrying the box, the guy playing the flute, and even the other people. So I think it's got both incongruity and also a wonderful layering that we're sitting around talking about it. So as an artist and as a journalist, Tony wins big time because we are engaged in seeing all those things come together in one picture. And even if we're just guessing what some of that symbolism is, it's good enough as an image to make us draw those conclusions and wonder, is he looking at the flag at Wall Street? Is he looking down the street at the bull? Are they just fascinated by, wow, this is all there is? Because, you know, when you do go to Wall Street, you go, this is it? This is what they're talking about? A bunch of people in suits walking around and a flag and a big building? So it's just got all kinds of things going on it for me because it's a slice of life versus some big moment. And a slice of life for me always has more telling information.
Very much like a carefully orchestrated theatrical, only it's very, very real.
Is anybody really attracted to the woman on the other side of that statue at the top right? I can't stop looking at her, and I think Michael's point about that, you know, these little touchstones that keep drawing us back into the picture. For me, it's that. I'm not sure what to make of her figure. I want to zoom in more and see what is that she's wearing. Why does she appear to have a costume on, or is her skirt hiked up? And she's looking right at us, which I also find a couple of the other figures are looking at the photographer, the man with the flute, maybe the guy at the top of the stairs, but she's sort of right there, almost performing with a gesture, and I find that really interesting.
I totally agree. It's almost like a student or somebody in an audience where there's a speaker saying, "Excuse me, I have a question about this."
There's really a flourish to that.
That's a great way to put it.
She's also the only one who's looking out, really. I mean, she's looking out as she's trying, as the viewer, she's addressing us. Everyone else is doing something within the frame. Maybe that's it. She's reaching out of the image, almost literally. And plus, she's also partially obscured, so you can't make her out, you know. So yeah, I think it really is. It's interesting. Also, she's sort of crowded in there a little bit. So that sort of wants to, you know, when you want to separate, she's not clear in the way that some of the others are.
Her hand gesture sort of prompts us to take the whole image as sort of a dance. And then when I look at her hand and think about that, then the next place I go is the guy with the Staples box and his right foot. And, you know, also very kinetic movement, but also, you know, talking about movement and flow, but also I think drama too. And I think Tony's pictures are also quite dramatic. So, and then also the guy looking up, also, then it starts to really feel very dramatic or I guess cinematic.
And I just, been following the conversation, and I thought it'd be quite nice to introduce you guys to another body of work by a friend of mine in London, who actually photographed the London equivalent of Wall Street, which would be kind of a city, as an insider. So he actually worked as a banker and a trader for the best part of 5 years and photographed it from the inside. I'll just put a link up.
Thank you.
That sounds great. Also, is there... go ahead.
Go ahead, Michael.
Yes, Michael Shaw. I was just going to say that it seemed like there's some irony, too. I mean, I've looked at this picture for quite a bit, and I think the strength of the picture is that more things do just keep coming out, and the points everyone's making are incredible. But, you know, just looking at this guy, I assume he's a homeless guy. Then I start thinking about the missing George Washington as opposed to the homeless guy with a flute, and then I jump from there to Fife and 1776 and patriotism, and I don't know. I think there's quite a twist of irony there, just in terms of him playing that instrument.
I'm also really interested in the gendered aspects of her figure. And again, I want to look more at her closely to see what she's actually wearing. But from afar, she looks like she's wearing a freakishly exaggerated female necktie that was associated with the go-go 1980s, and the woman whose costume in the professional sphere had to be the same as men, and so you had the women going to work in their suits and tennis shoes and these giant bow ties. And so to me, it you know, given that all the other figures in the frame, including the absent George Washington, are male, it's also interesting that she's hailing us, you know, with this kind of exaggerated bow or whatever it is around her neck. You know, I'd like to, as Laurette put it, you know, like maybe raising her hand and saying, "I have a question about this."
I think that's one of the interesting things about photograph. I mean, different photographs work in different ways. Certainly, Michael Williamson's great picture of the couple, our eye enters the frame and looks at them and looks at their humanity, but then it starts wandering around the rest of the frame as well to situate them into a bigger context. This one is very theatrical, and it seems to have representative characters of a number of different walks of life. And I can't remember who said it, but you know, the idea of here's somebody who may be homeless playing music, while the other people are certainly in the dance. And that's something that I'm sure Tony was like totally conscious of, because this is the way a photographer works intuitively and with response that's drawn from experience and seeing. But I do think it's remarkable, this guy with the box, you know, he's wearing the suit, his tie is off. We have the guy who, while he's not exactly Joe the plumber, he's sort of everyman. And then we have, you know, younger people, and then coming back to this is where the first president of the United States took his oath of office.
having a really good conversation on this. We're running a little short on time. I want to actually skip to the last image, sticking with sort of the CEO. We'll hopefully get at least a couple more in. The CEO's sort of economizing with McDonald's. This is a Ben Baker photograph. Obviously, people need to duck out in a few minutes because that's what they anticipate. That's, of course, fine. But if you want to stick around, that sounds great to me. So what do we make of this? I mean, there's so many, something I want to sort of like, if we continued carrying our eye up, would there have been a boardroom above that street scene we just saw and it would look like this?
That's a scary thought. Can anybody talk? Go ahead.
So this is a photo illustration, just to be clear?
No, it's not. It's a photo of the board of directors of McDonald's, and I think they were trying to be funny and sort of empathetic as well in terms of closing the gap between what we would call today the 1% and the 99%. But the caption is right there in the text box.
Yeah, this is Williamson. Yeah, that caption, that picture, are what I'm really seeing. This is the creepiest photo I've seen in years, because the whole point of the haves and have-nots is often the haves are so disconnected, and the idea that this would be funny and cute and we would be connecting with the regular people with the dollar menu, and they wouldn't see that imagery or symbolism would almost be rubbing in the face or a slap in the face, that they couldn't see that is more informative than anything else. I'm actually falling off my chair. This picture is worth 100 million words.
Yeah, I'm still here.
Did you have something you wanted to add on that?
I think I should have taken my hand off. Apologies.
That's just fine. How about David? Or no, I guess Lorette's next and then David.
Yeah, I'm entirely with Michael Williamson. Because of the lighting, because of the use of color, I thought this was totally staged, and I didn't know for certain that these were indeed McDonald's executives. But the so fakey smile photographs, Happy Meal, Happy Meal, Happy Meal. Knowing everything that we know about nutrition and how poor people now, they'll go to McDonald's because they can get a little bit more food than they can get rice and beans and some other things that would be good. This image is so scary, and I guess maybe part of it is because they're the 1% and they're maybe the only ones who can laugh about all this.
David here. And basically, I was going to talk about the formal issues, but that's largely been covered. I do have a question as something that might be especially interesting to other photographers in the audience, which is the access issues. How was this photograph made, in what context?
Can I duck in there? I've just been on Ben Baker's website. It seems like he's more of a kind of a portrait photographer sent on assignment to make specific images for a feature. I'll put a link up so you can see his tear sheets. So it's kind of less photojournalistic, more kind of, here's a person, photograph them.
Yeah, just briefly, I don't know the complete answer to that question, but as I saw it and took it, I think it's more maybe even a studio shot for the McDonald's annual report. So, I mean, to the extent that the other images, or most of the images we're looking at, are photojournalism, maybe this was a little bit of a unfair to throw this in the mix, but still, and it's really important to understand the different context in which it was taken and promoted. But I still felt they couldn't leave it off the table.
You can write a dissertation on consumption.
Go ahead. Was that Andrew?
Yeah, I just find it interesting how I struggle to even see this as a photograph. because of just the way it's lit, I want to dismiss it as some kind of corporate brochure.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting too, because it's the sense of what we've been seeing are up until now are although in some cases, such as with the Goff photograph about the person getting himself arrested, it almost seems staged. They're realistic. They're real. They're actual context. This one, although it could, quote unquote, could be real, it's clearly for promotion purposes. And yet it's, it's shocking.
My question almost is, how is McDonald's letting this out? This goes back to Michael Williamson's point about these people being out of touch, but also I'm sort of curious about their public relations people even beginning to let something like this get out into the world, because it does convey that disconnection. And anybody looking at this, I think, not even knowing anything about photography, is just going to go, whoa, who are those people? And that they let it out into the sort of larger universe is kind of surprising. In a good way, but for us, but a bad way, I think, in terms of what they're aspiring to do. And I'm not defending them.
Yeah, I think David raises an important point. I mean, we can't just look at photographs that I mean, an editor knows this. You can't just look at photographs, you can't just slap them on a screen or on a page or something and expect people to understand the context in which they were originally made, because we'll first start reading them as pictures themselves. These people look so plastic. It looks so staged, and I'm sure, David, you would have given, and you can still do that, talk about the formal qualities of how we're drawn into the photograph. But it would be unfair to just put this elsewhere except in a commentary if we didn't have the information about how it was made. I mean, with thinking of this in relation to the recession, we would have to have more context as well. Granted, there's also the possibility that the McDonald's Corporation would not understand how people will look at this image. I mean, Marie Antoinette said, well, if they're hungry, let them eat cake. She didn't get it either, and certainly we see some contemporary versions of that.
I think, too, just putting this in dialogue with Michael Williamson's photograph with the pizza, holding the pizza, is food is such a critical way of seeing poverty or understanding what kinds of food people are eating. And in Michael's photograph, it's clearly a choice that makes sense in that context. Plus, I love pizza anyway, but just besides, in terms of the price of it. But here, there's something really degrading, I think, in a way. This is sort of done as being in sympathy, but it ends up being an insult. I mean, just from their suits alone, you can see they prefer high-end sushi to what they actually market and sell.
Yeah, Nate, on that point, the fourth guy in on the left who's doing kind of the aping face with the open wide mouth, about to shove whatever the burger is into his mouth. I mean, to me, yeah, they're all pretending to eat for the most part, except the guy in the very back seems to actually be drinking his soda. But yeah, it's a performance that in a way really is offensive to people who rely on their very cheap meals to eat.
Yeah, and so I think in a way, you weren't here, Kara, for that part of it, but I sort of framed this as the way how difficult it is to see the recession and make it visible. This is one of those images that I think actually makes it less visible, whereas the other ones are trying to bring. This is designed to do the opposite, in effect. It hides it behind a burger.
This is Williamson again. Yeah, you guys. I still say I don't even look at this as a photograph. It's like evidence they could use in a crime, whether it be obesity or exploitation of cheap labor and low benefits. It still goes back to the incredible disconnect. Whether you're the PR person, the CEO, anybody in this photo that didn't have the intellect to realize the symbolism of how stupid this picture is and how potentially it could be used to mock them or show their misunderstanding of what their food does. It tells me more that you could write 20 books, and this photo will solve it for me much quicker in terms of, gee, why don't they get this? Or why don't they put less sodium and less fat and less, what? Because they don't care. That's why.
Maybe we can jump over to Michael's second photo, Williamson's.
Got it.
The caption on this is just amazing. Talking about context. I mean, we forget that people like this man used to have a life.
I made a point of both putting this later in the edit than Michael Williamson's first photo because, as we really elaborated pretty thoroughly, the first picture is so much about resilience and hardiness and is not iconic. And this image starts to move in a more iconic sphere, I believe, but I really feel, especially when you know the context and you see the caption, and the guy is writing, and the guy seems very thoughtful and contemplative, and even with his feet, it almost feels like a kind of a lively, alive, almost playful motion. I think it also shows resilience in a different way, but then you also see this in juxtaposition. And of course, the woman off to the right might just be sleeping, but then it really does highlight how alive and present this guy is, even in what are clearly really dire circumstances for him.
This is Williamson here. This is Richard Archer. He had been laid off about 7 months before as a UPS worker. Had an apartment which he lost when he couldn't pay his rent. Girlfriend left him. As he put it was kind of cute. He said, I think I'm just the lyrics to a country and western song, losing everything. What was most fascinating about Richard was that he ended up outside this church where there was a couple of dozen people sleeping. Elderly people, young people, middle-aged, every kind of American you could imagine. A lot of people would come down thinking they were going to work at Disney World or get construction jobs, and many of them had been there for months. The thing that drew us towards him was not that he looked kind of normal, was that journal. If you look closely, you can see he's writing in his journal. That very page I did a close-up of, and here's the first line. He's writing to his mother. Dear Mom, I can now feel my body dying slowly on me. I really need help. I'm lost. And he wrote these daily journals to her, and then he would actually photocopy them and send them to her as letters. But he was still attempting normalcy. He had his little earbuds. He would tune out the world of screaming and yelling people with music. He would write and by day go look for work or collect tin cans. There was kind of a strange normalcy. He had by no means given up. He had by no means, was in the state of depression where he couldn't operate. He was just marking time, and I am happy to say that we, in fact, did a 3-month follow-up on him, too, and he got a $10 an hour job in a sharing apartment with several people, and at least in his mind, on his way back.
Michael, I think the first thing I thought of when I saw this photograph is I don't know if it's when you were first at the Washington Post, but many years ago you did an essay on the homeless people that you encountered there sleeping on grates in the middle of winter on sidewalks and so on. And I've used those examples before to talk about how we show homeless people or how we show the issues. This is so remarkably different from some of the ways you did those earlier photographs, and certainly none of us, as David said, we continue to learn and grow in our work. But what's remarkable about this is how you show this man's humanity. Yes, he is a homeless person, but you show him as an individual. You show him as not just somebody who's down and out, but perhaps a little bit more of how he's down and out and the kinds of things that would point whether or not he even has a chance of going someplace else.
Well, you bring up a really good point. I was haunted by those people I met in Alabama who, not always, but oftentimes resented being the symbol of something bigger than themselves. Being, Ellie Mae Gudger being the symbol of the Depression, being the symbol of poverty, being the symbol of someone who is down on their luck with no hope. And that has had a big impact on me in that, I've evolved. I'm going to give the subjects credit for evolving also. Me and my buddy, who've been working together for 32 years, we just did an update book called Someplace Like America, and a lot of it, I went back and photographed people from 30 years ago to now. And the reason they were easy to find is I've kept touch with many of them. We exchanged Christmas cards and all that sort of stuff. Some of them aren't any better, some are worse, some are way better. But in the end, what our follow-up involved was how much people learned from what happened and do feel, just like our great-grandparents in the Depression, that they are better off from what they learned. They don't get in over their head. They don't lose their homes because they don't buy stuff they can't afford ever again. So I'm strange in that I've been doing the poverty stuff for 35 years and counting now. I still see Americans as very resilient, hopeful, hardworking people. They're not going to go in a ditch and, die and rot and give up. They're going to hang in there. And one of the ways I try to make people identify with this is show as much normalcy as I can. And you brought up a good point. My early stuff was, hey, they're just screwed. That's the story. It was unsophisticated and simplistic, where now they're the full breadth of being an American and being a citizen. Writing letters to mom, listening to music, and the only difference is I don't have a job, any money, or a house. But other than that, I still like Star Wars and, American Idol. And that's the layering, more psychological than it is visual, that I try to bring these days.
Ben? Yeah, I've actually just got to sign out now to get on with other stuff. I just wanted to finally make one point, just what Michael's saying about American people being very resilient. I absolutely agree with this. I spent 3 weeks in Atlanta, Georgia, and this was last summer, and I was just struck by the kind of ingenuity and the desire to work and make things happen that I saw from the vast majority of kind of struggling people in America.
Thank you.
David here, and I'm also going to have to sign off, but I would like to echo that and take it maybe one step further, which is that one of the things that I've been able to do when people see my work is it's a reminder of many of the things that Michael said about people should learn some of these lessons and move forward. And we as photographers, I think that's one of our jobs, to make sure the work is out there and getting people to, of course, pay attention to this, but also to think about what's next and what they can do. And then I want to thank everybody who's here, and especially the BagNews Notes people, for putting this together.
We are really thrilled to host this and other conversations. We're planning one in a couple of weeks on Occupy Wall Street. So hope you'll be there. Nate, final thoughts?
It's been a really, really interesting discussion. It's great to hear what people were looking for when they took their shots. I just find the whole issue of trying to capture something that, as I said at the beginning, so palpable and so widespread, and yet so very difficult to actually visualize for most people. I think that's just, as a visualizing challenge, it's extraordinary that something that affects millions of people could be so difficult to actually see. Maybe it's because we just don't see it when we do see it, such as this person. If I saw him on the street and not here, I wouldn't know.
Well, hopefully that's the role of the photographer, is showing that there's more than just that first glance, allowing somebody to actually see those people. Out of all of the homeless people that I've worked with for a few years, I can tell you there are some people who fit the so-called stereotype, the people who will never join society for a variety of reasons. But there are all sorts of people like this man and some of the other people. We also don't really understand the people who are clueless, like the McDonald's figures, and I hope we'll see more of that. Excuse me.
Well, I just wanted to thank David and Ben, Michael, Andrew, and Tony for giving it the shot to get in the room. I think that once we got rolling, there's some pretty interesting commentary here. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining us. Hope to see you soon.